Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, a simple webinar to create effective webinars, brought to you by Timothy Mitchell, an FGA board member who has worked in digital printing for over 20 years. Timothy joined the HP LaTeX team in 2010 and has been involved in all facets of HP LaTeX technology, with a specific focus on applications, especially soft textiles, digital decor, and wall coverings. Timothy also created the HP Garage Academy at his home to support the HP remotely and provides webinars to teams across the Americas. My name is Haley Bartley and I'm the Member Program Specialist here at IFAI, and I will be moderating today's session. If you have any questions or comments, please submit them into the comments box on your control panel and we will address them at the end of today's webinar. You may send them in at any time during the presentation. With this, I would now like to introduce today's speaker, Timothy Mitchell.
Thank you, Haley. Hi, everyone. It is a beautiful spring day here in Cumming, Georgia, just north of Alpharetta, just north of Atlanta. I have decided to try to support a webinar that, for all practical purposes, I have no business promoting. The alternate title I had was a webinar for people who do not know how to do webinars, because until recently that was me. And I learned webinars through a process mostly by necessity. And so what I wanted this webinar to be is something that would explain the process to someone who has very little knowledge of webinars. So one of the first things I ask myself when I prepare a webinar or a web meeting or anything that's using a digital hookup is, who is my audience and why would they be tuning in? And in this case, I think that my audience are all the people are being told they have to do webinars because there's very little else productive to do. And as a result, they thought for a long time that webinars were like a secret society of IT webinar people. And now they're being asked to do them, and they're not exactly sure how to approach this. My goal is to have a brief presentation of what I think are the core pieces to think about to help you develop a checklist, and then develop a system that works for you to allow you to conduct webinars. I'd like to have that person who has very little knowledge get to 50% better at where they are. And that even if what I'm presenting is only 10% more than they have now, I admit that's a thin presentation, but the process that I've learned by is mostly trial and error. And that trial and error has served me pretty well because it's allowed me to make a lot of mistakes through the technology of the equipment and then recover from it and then eventually build something that sort of works. It started for me, the idea of doing webinars, on a trip to Brazil. So I was sent to Brazil to support a channel partner. And the channel partner had locations all over Brazil. And for those of you who are not quite aware of geography, which I think includes most of us, it's huge. Okay, Brazil is enormous. And so you're flying on flights all over the country, connector flights, taxis, hotels, and I'm trying to cover all of these locations, and it's stretching out for 2 weeks. Now, nobody in their right mind thinks, being sent around Brazil, I should develop a system to prevent me from going to Brazil regularly to support them. They're very nice places. Many of the locations are almost beachfront. So Fortaleza beachfront, Rio beachfront, no complaints from me. But the efficiency of it didn't make sense. What really made sense is if I had maybe met once for like a day or two in the main location, if that, and then had sent webcams and arranged monitor systems at all of the remote locations. That would have allowed me to use translation software. It would have saved us all this expense. And I believe that there's a learning process where you can take a certain amount of information for a short period of time and you're done. And then you need to do something with it. And then over time, you have another piece of information. And you add this information gradually as you learn. It's a little bit like learning like swing dancing or something. You have to do it and then learn a little more, and do it and learn a little more. You can't just take 8 hours and shove it into their heads. They tune out after 2. And when you travel like this, I have to be impactful for 8 hours because that's the investment. What I really want to do is keep coming back to them on a regular basis and be able to handle it that way. I think that makes a great deal more sense. Another thing to think about, this is very important. Unless you are George Carlin or Richard Pryor, you are generally not interesting for an hour. It's very difficult for anybody to speak for an hour and be really interesting. I know that right now, all the people who are listening, the attention is being dragged in a lot of different directions. They're on their laptop, they're checking their email, they're messing with the dog, the kids, breakfast. It's very difficult for one person to hold people's attention. And as a result, I always prefer to have guests if possible so that I work with a team. If you can add other people to your presentation, it allows a break of the monologue, and it also allows you to play to their strengths and your strengths. Let me give you an example. Johnny Carson, arguably the greatest entertainer of modern talk show TV, he only gave a 9-minute monologue. He had an hour-and-a-half show. Johnny's core monologue was 9 minutes. The rest of it was the band, it was banter with Ed, it was guests, it was musicians, it was a variety act, it was sketch. He mixed it up because he knows that an hour and a half is a long time to fill, and yet people do webinars for an hour and a half with slides, going on and on over a slide, not realizing that half the people have tuned out within the first 15 minutes. And they're just going to look at the slide presentation later. And I find myself doing that. So I like to use people and bring them on board. So I want to find, if I'm Johnny, and I'm not, I always want to find my Ed. And my Ed is Paul Wagner. Paul, are you on?
Hey-o.
Hi, Paul. See, that
Hey,
was
Tim.
timed perfectly. See, I knew Paul would be on there. Hi, Paul. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks, Tim. How about you?
I'm very well, thank you. So today, unfortunately, normally when we do presentations, Paul does a real technical deep dive component of it, and I do the dog and pony song and dance show. And we kind of have a routine, and we develop timing with one another. I strongly encourage you, when you do webinars, look to form a team where you have your Paul. So Paul, today, unfortunately, I don't have a lot for you to do except just sort of play second fiddle Ed McMahon routine, but be aware I might bring you in a little bit later just to kind of break this up a little bit. So thank you very much for stopping by. There we go. Paul's even developing his Ed McMahon laugh. So there's another thing I want to emphasize, and this is really key, and I got this from Dennis Prager, who's a very fine talk show host. He's been on the air for years. Dennis said, you have to be interesting. That's the most important thing. Everyone is interesting in their own way. Some people are very passionate about the content. Some people are very passionate about communicating it. Some people are a little goofy. I think finding that part of you that's interesting and bringing it into the webinar is important, because you're going to try to present something to people, and it's important for you to try to hold their attention. And also, everyone has their own style. Find a style that makes you happy. For some people, it's just clinical. I'm going to deliver the goods. And for some people, it's a little frivolous. So I tend to play a little more of the frivolous side, and then when I need to deliver the goods, I call on Paul, and then he hits all the technical notes. And that's our current way of working. And that may change over time. But definitely don't be boring. To elaborate a little bit on it, everyone needs a posse. Okay? Right now, for example, I have 2, maybe 3 people on my posse for this. Haley is helping, and we've talked earlier about what she's doing. She's manning the navigation. She knows where we want to drive. She knows where we want to go, and she's making sure that the technical end of this, on your end, manning the webinar part, is handled. Like, I also knew that Paul would be right there because I can count on him. We've spoken earlier. I explained what I'm going to do. We went over it, and so he was going to be aware of it. We may even develop code words. So having somebody, and I have another person who might be a special guest today that might deliver something very nice for me, because my throat will get a little dry in a little bit here. But having co-hosts, people that you're going to put on and make a co-host or make a co-presenter, that can definitely take the weight off you. And in many cases, laying information off to them where they present for part of it gives you time to think and regroup or fix something behind the scenes, and it allows them to take over, and it breaks things up for the customer, for the listener. Definitely consult your posse. So I use certain little code words sometimes that I build in. Like today, Paul's code word is Godzilla. So if I use the term Godzilla, it means pretty soon here I'm going to call on him, so he needs to like shut the refrigerator door, put the dog aside, sit back down because he's just about to be live. And then my code word for Haley is penguin dust. So if I say penguin dust, that means Haley's going to get called on for something. Now the two words are kind of ridiculous and incongruous, but they pull your attention into actually paying attention. You can develop your own system for that or little keywords, but it's letting people know that you're about to bring them into this. And the only way you really have to do that if you're remotely is to try to find some way in the process to let them know that they're going to be brought in, especially as I do. I work fairly informally. Most of this is impromptu. Also, there's drawbacks. And another thing I use your co-hosts for other people is chats and questions. So when I do technical presentations, they can be meetings or webinars, and we'll get to that in a little bit. I bring people on board that I invite who are HP's technical team. And I know those people know the answers to the questions, in many cases better than I do. And I'm going to call them and have them there. So if somebody wants to answer a question or ask a question, they can answer the question in a chat while I'm giving a presentation. It's almost impossible for me to do both. There's also cases where the customer can only be, or the listener can only be on the line for a short period of time. It's a 1-hour webinar. They have 10 minutes, 15 minutes. They have a question. They want to get it answered and move on. Fine. I have somebody there for you. That allows me at the end not to have this enormous body of questions because people can ask questions and or chat during the course of the presentation. That's a little different for webinars versus meetings, and every software is a little different, but in general, it's really smart, I think, to do that. Be aware of one other thing. When you put, depending on your software, when you put co-hosts on, they have rights, and those rights include goofing up and ending the meeting. So let them know you now have control. If you're sitting in certain right privileges, you could actually shut the thing down, so please be careful. The other thing you always want to ask is, where are you? Where is your location, and what support do you have? In this case, I'm here in a fairly controlled room. I brought all my stuff here. I have my printers, my cutters, everything is hardwired. I have a high-speed internet connection. My data bandwidth is high. I have a pretty controlled environment. And with it, I can do more. I can use more cameras. I can use more computers. I can use more software. If I were doing it remotely, I don't have control over a lot of things. I don't know how good my bandwidth is. In some cases, I know people use, tablets, phones, all sorts of things like that. Where you are and your support team depends on the sophistication level that you're doing it. If you don't know, keep it simple. Use your laptop. I like a camera over a laptop. You're going to control it all. Know your software. Switch between share screen and your camera and keep it easy. Don't make it complicated because you may not know what kind of bandwidth you have. If you're doing things alone, which is usually how I do it, you got to run everything. So the simpler you make it, the more seamless it's going to be. If you have too many moving parts while you're doing it by yourself, it's definitely going to pose a challenge until you develop quite a bit of technique under your belt. Phone-based webinars. Okay, I have people doing phone-based webinars. My first question is, are you driving while you're doing a webinar? Like conducting a webinar? And if you are, please pull over. Then resume your webinar. I do use phone webinars. I use a gadget I was going to show you a little later, but I may as well pull it out now. Sometimes they call these gimbals, just little phone stands. A gimbal technically is a phone stand that will automatically level to prevent jerkiness, but I'll use these. They're inexpensive. or they used to be, you can get them on Amazon, and then I just put the phone there. You can call in, use the phone, no problem. In some cases, I like a tablet phone combo where I might use the tablet to kind of see and then use the phone separately. Not a bad idea, but this is very important. Your webinar is only as good as your bandwidth. Now, right now, I'm split. I have a high-speed internet from Comcast running the camera and everything. And then the phone I'm calling in, and that's a separate audio channel. So I have two channels, and I have bandwidth well distributed. So I have a high degree of confidence in my bandwidth. You start doing webinars in strange locations or uncertain places, definitely check your bandwidth, because nothing kills a webinar like low bandwidth. The camera. What I'm using here is a fairly sophisticated Huddle Cam. It actually has auto tracking features. Now, I have disabled them for the time being because we'll get to this rule, Murphy's Law, and then Murphy's Law for video. Just too much risk and too much that can go wrong. But at some point, I have to overcome that and get more comfortable with the auto tracking features and really dial them in. But I'm not going to do it on a larger webinar. I'm going to do it on a smaller meeting. And I'm going to do a few before I really let go. I'll tell you a little story about that later. You have a camera in most cases that's on your laptop. The first thing I want you to use is there's a feature, particularly on all Windows-based machines. We're HP. We only use Windows-based machines. I don't know how a Mac works. So there's a feature on there called Camera. Click it. Look at yourself. I'm with a lot of teams around the world during this sequester, and I think, have these people looked to see what they look like at all? If you click the camera app on Windows, it will show you what you look like. And then the camera's angled and their face is in at an angle, and they're leering into the camera. The camera's lighting is terrible. Be aware of those things. I'm not saying you can necessarily fix them, but I am saying that you want to look at yourself and use that camera app. Before I do this set, I check that camera app there and I look around and make sure everything is where it's supposed to be and make sure everything is more or less working. Okay, there's certain things I can't control for. I'm trying. This, for example, is the carpenter bees who invade my garage because I have the garage door open, because the great big backdrop back there can't fit in the garage unless I open the garage door. If I open the garage door, the carpenter bees get in. So I'm ready. Okay, that's an invasion force, and I have an answer. The second is local friendly animals. They mean well, but they have to be persuaded, and so I have the water cannon. Because I have done presentations here and have all sorts of things sort of come into the garage strangely, and so now I'm trying to be prepared for it. Also, after you check the camera and you look and you're aware of yourself, check what's behind you, look at your lighting, look at your presentation. Is it acceptable? I don't think it's a bad idea necessarily to put your laptop on a stand. Have it where you're looking into the laptop and I'd even prefer it to be a little taller so it kind of looks just at the slightest angle down on me, which is where I have this camera, not looking up at you like opera, like stage lighting. I don't want to look up people's noses. So just move the laptop and be aware of where that camera shows. Also, you can check a lot of laptops and see if there's adjustments to that camera. And it's not a terrible idea, although you're going to have a hard time finding one these days. I mean, I just saw one online for $350 used. I've used these great little Logitechs. I don't work for Logitech, but these are very highly reviewed little Logitech HD cameras, and they're kind of legendary. I use these on my computer, and before I do an event, I turn it on, I go to camera, and then I scan around my room and see the lighting and the presentation. I get the orientation where I want it. How far in should I be? How far out? What do I want to frame? What's in the frame that I don't want in the frame? It doesn't take much to do that. I mean, we're talking about a minute, but it gives me an idea what I'm presenting to the person at the other end of the line. And then when I see them log in, I'm like, oh my goodness, do you people even notice what you look like? And I don't mean what your attire is or that your hair is standing on end. Mine's always standing on end. It's that there's no awareness of what their lighting looks like, what they look like, or anything else. That's one thing for an audience. It's a different thing for a presenter. I always prefer hard wiring. I hardwired the whole garage. Oh, we have a guest. Our famous Venetian plague doctor has brought me my iced coffee because my throat gets dry. So thank you, Venetian plague doctor. Very good. I prefer hardwire. I like hardwiring because I can count on it, and I know once I plug that camera in, it's hardwired. Now this camera is an Ethernet connection, so it sits as an Ethernet. The computer automatically gets that information and then it conveys it. Okay, so it's a solid hardwire system. Everything in here is hardwired. I don't like wireless unless you can count on it. Now, I do have a very good mesh wireless system here, but it does overlay with other wireless systems, and I don't want to have bandwidth issues or wireless fights in the middle of my presentations. If you're using a laptop, look at using it with the laptop itself, the screen dimmed. I have glasses, and if I'm talking into a laptop and the screen is bright, it refracts and you can't see my eyes. People like to see your eyes. So dim the laptop. That's going to reduce your lighting because that's your primary source of light, and then find other sources that you might be able to create some lighting with. That's going to help a little bit for them to look at you and not have, especially if you wear glasses, having the brightness of the laptop bouncing off. I prefer not to share my screen. I just put the main camera on the screen. So the system that I'm working here is this camera that I'm speaking to you in is connected to a PC, and right over there, I try not to look at it because they're like, what's he looking at? We're over here. Over there is me in a monitor. And every once in a while, I just glance because I'm looking at the back of the room. I'm making sure that things are right. I don't have the neighborhood dog or cats coming by. Just be sort of aware of it, but that's one system. Then over here, I have my PC for the software, which is ready for a screen share if I need it. And then you can't quite see it, but I have a laptop here, and there's another big monitor that's sitting right in front of here that's running my talking points. So all of this is a system that I'm using multiple things, and they're all hooked in. With cameras, don't get too hooked on 4K and high res and all that stuff. Most webinars are not that high resolution, or meetings. And keep in mind, you have people from around the world sometimes, and they may not have high bandwidth. So it's not always the best idea to have super high bandwidth. What's important is you have a stable connection and reliable bandwidth. I think you can get more. I could take an older 720 camera and adjust the lighting and the positioning and everything, and I think the overall effect would be better than somebody with this brand new Logitech but has it all set up wrong, or hasn't looked at lighting, doesn't know their presentation, and other things. That brings us to lighting. Lighting is something that in the video age is a little more forgiving because traditional cameras were very dependent on your lighting. Things look terrible without lighting. A lot of these new cameras are very good with lighting, so I don't have that much to do. But I still do look at the lighting carefully. Like here in my garage, I have pretty decent lighting. I have some overhead lighting that you can't see, and what I did is I brought that up a little bit so that you couldn't see it and it wasn't creating as much of a spot. I have a light here, over there, and this is just traditional fluorescent lighting. I tend to work with the lighting I have, and this presentation is directed towards people who would have what they have. I'm not going to tell you, hey, you need to spend $800 on an LED lighting system. That's not reasonable, and you probably couldn't buy one right now anyway. Wait till about 2022, and they'll be available again. So you got to use what you have. I have daylight coming in from the garage. I have overhead lighting, and for most camera and web applications, it's fine. But feel free to experiment. I might take one of these bulbs and dim it and bring some, more indirect lighting. I thought about I have kind of this set up as like a little boxing gym thing, and I've got some rugs on the ground, but I thought about making it like a sofa and a little lounger, maybe a nice lamp. There's other things that you can do and change the lighting, because lighting changes the mood. It changes it a lot. It's one of the things people don't know. or don't notice about their environment, and it changes their environment a great deal. So do definitely, if nothing else, become aware of lighting. There were some tricks I did when I was in the demo center. We had these spotlights, right? And I need those spotlights to illuminate stuff, but the problem was they were causing they're like these old school halogens, and they're track lighting, and they're causing this terrible burn, and I couldn't adjust them to get the burn out. So what we did is we took some really thin, like taffeta fabric that was, it's got a very forgiving FR burn point, and we wrapped the top of the face of the light, and then I took gaffer's tape around the back and strung it in there. And so we put the lights back in with the taffeta fabric, and we tried 4 or 5 different fabrics to get the effect we want. We wanted to reduce the burn. We wanted to dissipate the strong light. We wanted to soften it. We even shifted the color a little bit, and it looks much nicer. Because now when I stand there and give my presentation, I don't have these lights like interrogation burn lights in my face. So as much as possible, try to find a friendly, soft lighting. When I'm in front of my computer, I dim the computer, and then I have 2 lights behind it that I kind of put there off to the sides to kind of account for that. And then I create some light around me just to kind of soften it. It creates a nice environment. Just be aware, and you can even, if you want to get some of these inexpensive photographic lighting systems, you can still get them on Amazon for about $60. So those do work. They're like, big kind of box lights. And it's primitive, but it's still effective. Presentation. That's how do I look on camera. The first rule, don't wear stripes and don't wear checks. Now my problem here is I have a check shirt, okay? I hardly have any solid colors, but it's stripes or checks. So what I did is I put on the checks, I have solid gray pants and then a dark blue vest, and the vest kind of takes away the worst of the moire patterns that will show up when you have strong checks or stripes. I've done some major video editing on videos that were perfect, except I wore a stupid striped shirt. So do be aware that what you wear has to make sense for video. The other thing is I tend to avoid is light colors. I've done this with I wanted to do like a spring thing, and I came out in light pinks and light blues, and the problem was I just washed out completely, especially with this lighting, which tends to be a little strong. Here's something I may as well let you guys know. Yes, you in fact do look fat on camera. Everyone looks fat on camera because maybe you are fat. One of the things I realized is I'm fat, and the camera doesn't lie about it. Now, the only people that do not look fat on camera are people that work in Hollywood. Okay, those are different people. They're like miniature people. They're like 3/4 people, and they're super thin. And when you meet them, you're like, oh my goodness, they're thin, really thin. Okay, you don't meet them in normal life, and they get swept up to Hollywood soon. They look great on camera, but you're always going to look a little odd to yourself. Get used to it. It's okay. Everyone does. You don't look like you think you look, and that's kind of one of the funny things about doing a lot of webinars and video work. But with lighting and positioning, it can make you look better rather than worse. Dress according to the event. Don't overdress, don't underdress. That's also true in our industry for trade shows. A lot of the people I work with are covered with tats and piercings, and for me to show up in a full suit and tie is a little off-putting to them. Who is your audience? Use a mirror before the show. I mean, just stand there and look at yourself for a second. Do you look good? Or do you look acceptable? Is there something really wrong? It's not a bad idea. It takes just a nanosecond to scan yourself in a mirror. Here's the other one. This is really key. We're going to do this together. You have to relax. Usually when I do these presentations, there's a part of me, some part of me is like tensed up, and I'm not even aware of it. So at some point, I just sort of stop for a second and then sense, is there some part of me that has decided to go rogue? And then the other one, which is really important, is breathing. See, I'm already speaking a little too quick. I'm speaking quicker than I would like because I'm not breathing. The more you breathe, the more you're aware of it, the more you relax. So breathing is always going to be key to your presentation. For me, it's, am I going to get to the end of this in time? It's still important to breathe your way through it. Breathing is the key if you're going to stand in front of a camera. Also, if you're not going to wear trousers or pants, then you have to make sure that the camera cuts off at the waist. So like morning webinars with the team, if you don't want to wear pants, that's fine, but you have to make sure wear the camera, and that's where the camera button comes in, because you have to wear, if you understand. And if you stand up, then that camera is going to pan back out, and your efforts to cut yourself off at the waist will be lost, and then it will cause friction within the team as a possibility. Audio. So make sure that you can be heard. Audio is really key to webinars. I use a wireless headset that is Bluetooth connected, and I did go with the one that closes my ears off. So I really don't hear what's going on in the room much, which is fine. I have a very good noise canceling mic on this. This is a Jabra Legend, I think is what they call it. It's a great noise canceling mic. They have one-ear version or two-ear versions. This is Bluetooth connected to my telephone, okay? The phone and the mic. Now, penguin dust. It's very important that you're aware of whether or not you're being heard. I've had instances where my connection has dropped out. They're trying to reach me through chat. I'm talking to a camera. I can't see chat. So Haley, is everything working okay? Is everyone hearing me?
Yes, everything's good.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just sort of checking in with you and making sure things are smooth.
Yep.
Great. Working a little system where you can reach out to one of your posse members, one of your team, where you're going to check in from time to time is a smart idea. I have done 15 minutes of presentation and my audio had cut out and you don't even know it. So that's other things like with the phone, you want to make sure you're hit do not disturb. Now I put that on do not disturb, and yet a phone call came in right as I was starting. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So having a phone call interrupt or having go live in the middle of a presentation is a problem with a phone. I also keep a backup phone around in case something goes wrong that I can just call back in with another phone and resume it. I prefer a Bluetooth phone system. Like most people who do professional video, you want an audio channel and you want a video channel. This is my video channel, and that's on the Ethernet. That's connected to my Comcast, and that's hardwired. My audio connection is a different connection. It's a call-in, and the call-in has always for me been very stable. It's reliable, and if I switch from PC to PC, it comes with me. It doesn't break out. It doesn't disappear. I don't have to keep monitoring it. I have used other systems. One here, which I have, this is a Bluetooth, this is a USB system that has its own radio signal. And I have had, especially in the demo center, no end of trouble with it. And I had trouble with it because we have so much noise and interference. I was dropping out, and I would drop out for 10 seconds at a time, but I don't know that. That is very off-putting to the person listening. If I'm listening to somebody's presentation and they keep dropping out, or I'm having that Bluetooth noise when they're too far away or there's interference, my answer is goodbye. I don't have time for it. It's terrible. I can't stand audio distortion like that. And it makes it impossible for me to focus because all I focus on is the audio distortion. If you lose or do not have consistent audio in your presentation, it makes what you're trying to say virtually impossible to most listeners. Another trick, or another failing of Bluetooth, which is something to be aware of, as I stand here, I have at least 6 other devices that are hungry for that Bluetooth headset signal. Okay, one of them is the other Apple phone. I'm running an Android on this one. And then maybe I left the tablet on and that has the Bluetooth still active. And then I have a PC over on the other side of the wall here that also uses a Bluetooth connection that I somehow link to this. And then I have the worst of all, is I have a Ford F-150 on the other side of the wall. And that Ford F-150 also has a Bluetooth connection. So when I get in the Ford, it switches over. Well, I'm doing this and I'm talking and the sound is gone. The Ford truck has the Bluetooth signal. I'm talking away. My host is telling me through a chat, we can't hear you. What happened? Where are you? And I don't have a clue. I don't have any idea until I look at my phone and realize, okay, the truck has the signal. That is definitely something to be aware of when you're using Bluetooth. So if you do that, pull your Bluetooth from all the other things around you. Turn it off. I unplug the Bluetooth USBs from these things before I do a presentation because I just don't want the hassle. And if you forget one, it just completely throws off your presentation. And if you don't know what's happening, it really throws it off. So be aware of those kind of things because I've been down that road before. Again, I mentioned do not disturb. Definitely put that on and make sure. I also usually, my Android won't let me because of corporate requirements. With the iPhone, I set it for screen on, do not turn off. And I set that right there where I can look at it. So I am seeing visually that the phone is active, it's on, and the screen is still under Call Connect. That disappears and I go, okay, maybe something has gone wrong. But then the other thing you can always do is use your team members to reach out to and reinforce that they're still there. Definitely check your equipment. Do a punch list and check it. What do I need to look for? Like I mentioned, the Bluetooth. Go around the house and unplug your Bluetooths. Have everything working ahead of time. So this morning at 8 o'clock, Haley and I were on making sure all of the sound, the audio, the system, the room looked right. I didn't call Paul in because he's out in California on the West Coast, and I didn't want him to have to get up at 5 o'clock to join us. I had enough confidence that she would be able to handle it. And that's the other thing is make sure the people that you're working with, you're going to have a lot of different skill levels. When I explained what I'm doing with Haley, she knew exactly what was up and how to do it. And so I just entrusted her. She's got it. She knows the drill. But definitely do a dry run with any new partner. I always do a dry one either the day before or several hours before, especially with a new partner, so that we make sure everything works. There's a lot of web softwares I work with. HP is on Zoom. Zoom is my primary, but I also work with GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar all the time. But I've used Meeting Jam, TalkBird, you name it. Most of them all work the same, but they don't all always work. And you might have people on the other end, they inherited, you're the webinar person. Okay? That's who this kind of video is really for, is you're the webinar person. You have to figure this out. And it's not that hard, but knowing your software and then also definitely assume always that stuff is going to go wrong and then have a plan B to accommodate it. That's why I always have my extra phone here. And mention it again, low bandwidth kills webinars dead. Low bandwidth, that's like the death of a webinar. When nobody can hear anything and it's bouncing and it's dropping out, just not going to work. You're going to have to call Comcast and up your juice. I was very grateful that we have a lot. I paid for the high bandwidth program because now in this house I'm running a ton of it. And I've had customers doing webinars where seemingly they've got everyone else in the family on the bandwidth at the same time. I tell all the kids, sorry, I got a webinar. You're going to have to turn off the phone. I know they're going to die. You're going to have to turn off the TV. All these other things that are pulling bandwidth need to go off because I need that bandwidth right now. Types of equipment. I mentioned my little stand for the phones. Those work very handy. You can get a nice position and put that where you want. And then you can do a surprisingly good webinar with modern phones. You know, if you have a nice little headset like this is a I've also used just simple little Plantronics, you know, the little Plantronics Voyager. I put that in my ear and then I can hear everything and everything works quite well. One thing about those little headsets, I have had meetings with people where we're doing more of a meeting rather than a webinar, and I cannot for the life of me understand them because they're sitting on a conference table talking into a universal mic from the people. And I'm trying desperately to hear them, and I can't. I'm only getting about 50% of what they're saying. That's why I switched to this, which really lets me, an audio, drill into a meeting. So when people are talking, I hear very specifically what they're saying, because I can't just say, hey, everyone here needs to get off that conference call phone and call in individually. It's not going to happen. You have to accept that their technology may be crude, and so your technology is going to have to be as good as it can get or you can afford so that you can hear people when they're trying to talk to you. Same with a noise canceling mic, and this one automatically mutes when I lift up. Slide it down and it unmutes, and that's handy because you're always forgetting what mutes it. It's actually the space bar, depending on the software. But you want to be able to mute and unmute because nobody wants. And then you have to have confidence that when you drop it back down again, everything is going to be there. So definitely, I like these headsets. It's worth the investment. The Plantronics and other ones work, and I do like a wireless. I've tried other ones where they connect into the phone. If you don't have it or it's not available, you can always get one that if your phone has a plug, you can plug it right into the phone, tuck it in your back pocket. It has a little wire, but I've been doing Sennheiser wired sets for years, and it's not that big a deal. It'll still give you what you need, and this noise canceling mic does a remarkable job of cutting out noise. In the demo center, it is noisy, like up to 90 decibels. And this mic allows me to do webinars and everyone hears me fine. Make sure you stay in range with the Bluetooth. If I leave that phone there and I walk behind that cement wall, it's gone. Now, people don't necessarily understand the difference between meetings and webinars. This is a webinar. Webinars are autocratic, okay? It's like an autocracy. You have very limited control. The audience does not see one another. You can't speak. You can't intervene. You can chat maybe, raise your hand. That's when I use my team members to answer those. But the audience is controlled and they're passive. Everyone is muted by design. That's a webinar. A meeting is a limited democracy. It's almost anarchy. Everyone logs in. They can unmute their mics. Now, I set it up so when you log in, you go to a waiting room, your mic is muted, and you have limited rights because you can control that also. I tend to do more meetings than webinars. But large presentation like this, webinar. Meeting, it's more intimate, it's more conversational. And you can structure yours as you see fit, depending on what rights you want to grant and everything. In Zoom, I do mostly meetings. It's not heavily controlled. I have smaller groups. I allow them to ask questions. But the single most off-putting, drive me crazy thing is all of the background noise that goes on if I give them the ability to unmute their mics. So that's when I like a team member, they'll turn their mic on, turn their mic back off again. I don't handle it. They do. They turn it on, they turn it off, and then we don't get all the craziness that is left as background noise if you don't mute their mics. It's one of the biggest problems with any kind of web meeting. When you set up a meeting, you choose your rights. My preference is I use a waiting room. I have music set from my computer to play in the waiting room. I will sometimes share my screen so you see the room here or you see something I've chosen with music that I've picked out. I like the music to be lively, I like Frank Sinatra. That's what I want to play. And then I have it set to record automatically when the meeting starts because I forget. It's easy to forget that because you're juggling with a bunch of other stuff. So I have it set when that meeting opens, when the host starts the meeting, it automatically starts recording. I record to the cloud. What Zoom does is it keeps it there for 30 days based upon our rights. Other things I'm sure work in similar ways. Also, I let nobody enter unless the host does, unless I see my team members are on. I say, okay, Paul, you're in. Chris, the sales guy, they're in. I'll let people in that are helping with the meeting early. I usually set everything up at least a half an hour advance. So it's all hooked up and running. The people are sitting in the waiting room. They're listening to music. And then I start the webinar. Those are my preferences, and I have them set as a template. Once you find your preferences and you like them, if you're using them regularly, go ahead and create a template if possible. Slideshow presentations. I call it death by PowerPoint. I didn't invent that, of course. I think that you need to keep your slides brief. Now, I am using slides, but I'm using them as a teleprompter or bullet points, and I'm trying to make it so that while I'm talking to you, I'm not looking over there, I'm just glancing. It just helps me remember what I already kind of know. Those are just a structure to keep me in the groove, and also with my team to kind of know where I'm going because I send them a copy in advance. If a slide is not needed or you've already done a slide, stop, go back to your camera, and use your video to communicate with people. To me, one of the biggest limitations of people doing webinars, and we have this with our organization, is you see a bunch of us with cameras, some people not, and then they put up a slide presentation, and all they do is talk over slides, and the slide isn't even relevant anymore. I want to talk to a person face to face, and the slide isn't germane to what I'm speaking about. I want to see the people, not the slide. That takes a certain degree of finesse if you're doing it by yourself, where you're going to share screen and then unshare screen, and then you keep your camera pinned, and it might be different in different softwares, so that the camera, like in this case, the camera is always the default. And then as I share and release, it goes back to the default. So we are talking, and then I'm using slides to support the ideas that I'm trying to get across. If that slide doesn't need to be there, don't do it. Speak to people. This is a replacement for personal contact, where we sit across from one another, or we go to dinner, or we go sit and have a drink at a bar. This is not beat you with slides and I don't even see you. I just hear a disembodied voice over a slide and I think, just send me the PowerPoint presentation and I'll be on my way. That's what I think. And I know a lot of other people do too. And get comfortable switching between that slide presentation and the camera. Shut down notifications on your laptop. Now, I have a slightly different system. My slideshow is set up with another PC for a reason, and that's because I don't want a whole bunch of unnecessary applications or interference, and it's very difficult sometimes for me to drill down through my laptop and make sure all that stuff is shut off. But I'll be watching presentations from people, and I keep trying to turn her Spotify off because I think it's my Spotify and it's hers because it's part of her screen, and she's got all this stuff bouncing around, and she's got notifications and emails dropping in, and I think, that stuff needs to be turned off or switch to a machine that's more neutral, that doesn't have all that stuff linked into it to do your presentation. Most people do it from their own laptops, and I think that opens the door for a lot of problems where you get a constant distractions going on in the presentation because of that. So we're going to try this here. I use a system, and I mentioned it already. I'm using 3 PCs. The screen capture PC is one PC, and that's where we're going to share in a second. I have another one which is doing my slides, which I'm using as a reference. And then just briefly, I'm seeing this one here, which is pretty much what Haley and Paul, I know what's going on over there, and that's the primary on the monitor. One is to monitor content. One is to stop me from looking sideways because I didn't want to do the slides here because I would keep getting distracted. And then a software camera is something that I set up in advance that doesn't have any song and dance, and I make sure everything on it is essential to what I want to present. So, Haley, if you'd be so kind, I'm going to switch to the software camera.
Okay.
So the Timothy PC software, ready?
Yep.
So it says show my screen. Now, before you hit show my screen, know what's behind the screen. This is where you can make a mistake. And since I know that it's easy to make a mistake here, okay, so at this point you should all be seeing connected to webinar. And this is where I normally will go through. And I have this PC all set up. It is controlled. It only does one thing. It has our core software, where I'm going to present and I'm going to explain all of these components to the customer. And then I'm going to go through the RIP software and explain how all that works. And then once I'm done with it, I'm going to say stop showing screen. And that should automatically kick me back to the main camera. I do that because I don't want to mess with all the laptop. It's too much going on over there. An inexpensive PC that runs this is not crazy money, and it gives me the peace of mind that that is always set up somewhere else to work and not have any glitches. Everything there I check before I get on it. It's like the adage of what is a good lawyer? He never asks a question, or she never asks a question they don't know the answer to. So when I go over there, I know everything is working, everything is connected, everything is hooked up, it's going to function like I need. I stop share, I go back to the main camera. Okay, I think this is one of my last slides. This is very key. I'm going to take a little drink of iced coffee. These are the things that if you do them, it could ruin your webinar. In a worst case scenario, could get you fired in what is probably likely to be a tough job market. Murphy's Law applies with any live presentation times 2. That's 1. If you're doing anything that you have not tried well in advance, it's Murphy's Law times 10. So I wanted today to do my video tracking because I have this slick camera and it will follow me around. It'll go over here and then I go there and I stand here and it finds me and then it zooms in. It's really cool, right? It's super cool. But any movement and that camera wanders off there. So if the bee wanders around, the camera will keep seeing the bee and go nuts. At one point, I had a badge, HB badge here on my belt, and it was movement, and the camera kept going. I'm like, I'm up here. It kept going down there. You want to know that if you do anything you have not strictly controlled for, Murphy's Law is now times 10 for that. Look for inappropriate things that the camera might see. Hang on a second. Whoops. Look for anything inappropriate that the camera might see. Anything. When I scan around here, I'm looking at something that shouldn't be on that camera that I missed. Now, don't play all like pure and innocent with me. Your laptop, I know it's a corporate laptop or it's supposed to be, and everything that you see around you is not always exactly what your HR department would approve of. A poster, an idea, a bumper sticker, you want to be neutral. Strictly professional. You do not want to have a conversation because you can't, there have been people at my company, not in my time, that just stupidly did a share and they shared at the wrong time and something came up and everyone saw it and you can't unsee it. And it's usually recorded. So then you can have a nice conversation with HR about that. Don't make those mistakes. If you're on camera, scan your environment. Your environment changes sometimes without you knowing it. That's why that camera button on your PC is so important. Look for anything inappropriate. People do lose their jobs over inappropriate content being broadcast on a webinar. And it wasn't even necessarily their fault. That's why that notification thing, some buddy of yours sends you something unsolicited and it bounces into your laptop at the wrong time. I don't even have it hooked up. I'm running a separate system that has no links to anything and it's strictly neutral, and it assures me when I go over there and I go open file, it doesn't go to open something that not everybody, it might not even be bad, just all it takes is one person that doesn't like it. Also, if you're running by the seat of your pants or a bunch of noise goes on in the background with a good noise canceling mic, in all honesty, they didn't even hear it. They don't even notice. They only notice if you notice. If you convey panic, if you convey it's going wrong, I don't know what I'm doing, that's exactly what the audience will pick up on. But otherwise, they won't even notice. They really don't. I've had forklifts going around behind me, and until I said something, nobody heard it. And that concludes my presentation for how to do webinars for people that do not know how to do webinars. And thank you, Paul, and thank you, Haley, for joining me here and helping me out with this on a beautiful spring afternoon in the great state of Georgia.
All right. Thank you, Timothy. That
Oh,
was terrific.
and the plague doctor. Thank you to the Venetian plague doctor for bringing my coffee.
All right, thank you both. It doesn't look like we have any questions, so appreciate the presentation. It was really great.
Good. All right, everyone, have a wonderful weekend. Get out in the sun if you can. At least hang out on your balcony and get out in the sun. And hopefully we will all see each other at a big event sometime very soon.
Agreed. Thank you.
Bye.
Tim.
Bye.